Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another Cal Falcons Q&A. I'm Sean Peterson.
And I am Lynn Schofield, and we are two of the folks doing Cal Falcon social media. And our guest here today is probably the person who knows these two Falcons better than anyone else, Bridget Ahern, aka Moon Rabbit Rising. And would you care to introduce yourself, Bridget?
Yeah, Bridget, and yeah, I spend a ton of time on campus. I've been watching the Falcons since 2020 was my first year. And as the story goes, I was walking on campus during the pandemic, and I heard a racket in the trees, and I thought, what in the sand, what the heck is that? I didn't really know about the Falcons. I like thought vaguely, oh yeah, I heard something about some Falcons, but went home, got my camera, and lucked out taking my first photo when I got back on campus. I saw the Jews and one of the parents and thought, wow, I was instantly hooked. Thought the Falcons were gorgeous. And then I learned later on that I had lucked out and it's very hard to photograph Falcons. So anyway, that's just a little bit about how I got to campus and to know the Falcons.
All right. Sorry, we lost Sean here for a minute. So
I guess we should lead off with where everyone is right now. So we had 4 chicks this year: Eclipse, Knox, Soul, and Aurora. Eclipse flew from the tower on Saturday morning pretty early, and then the other 3 all flew yesterday. So all have been up in the air and have all fledged and are doing really well. Annie and Archie are both keeping an eye on things, and it's been really exciting to kind of see all of the breeding season kind of culminate in a successful year.
Yeah, and thank goodness we have you here, Bridget, because now that the young have fledged, they're going to be largely off of the webcams now. And so only from the ground are people going to be able to see and experience a lot of what's going on in their lives now. And honestly, this is where their lives really start becoming more dynamic, more complex as they're learning to fly, as they're learning to hunt, and as they're kind of growing into themselves. And now I just have a couple people in the chat who are mentioning issues with volume and echo. So I'm trying to increase that a little bit. Are we getting better here?
I'm not sure. I guess you guys will have to check in and answer if we're sounding better. But I hear Bridget okay, and so hopefully we're all okay. All right, volume is fine. All right. Let's see. So what we've got in the background here are some of this year's shots of the brood fledging, because it's not really that fun to stare at an empty nest box. So we've got some of Bridget's amazing shots here. So Bridget, I think one of the questions I've seen a lot is, what kind of camera do you use to get these amazing pictures?
Yeah, I will say over the years, the camera and equipment has been upgraded. So that was one very important thing I learned. Right now, I use a Sony A1 camera, and I'm using a Sony 600 prime f4 lens. Some people have asked on campus if I use a teleconverter, and I don't. I think it softens the photos.
That's awesome. Has there been a good kind of tip or trick that you would give to people who are interested in kind of getting into photography?
Yeah, I mean, in particular in birds in flight, it's tricky. I would say one of the things I did, like I said, the first photos I got were pretty good, and then I thought, well, how come they're not as good anymore as I went along in 2020? And because I was so hooked on the Falcons, I did a lot of research. And one of the things I would say is whatever camera setup you're using, Sony, Nikon, etc., find a photographer that specializes in birds in flight that uses your equipment, and see if they have any info on the web. And that's what I did. The settings, for instance, that I use, there's a gentleman by the name of Mark Smith, who I believe is out of Florida, who uses Sony equipment. And I learned quite a bit about how to reprogram my camera for birds in flight. For instance, back button focus was key instead of just pressing the shutter. The other thing I would say for me that was most important and probably most impactful about learning how to photograph the Falcons, as I'm fond of saying, it's a long time waiting for just a little bit of action. And I had to learn the patterns. So that was super important as well. And over the years, I'm still learning, where they are, how to find them, how to look for them. But I think the most important thing was in those downtimes, I literally would try to take a photo of every bird, airplane, moving object that I could, so that I could get my hand-eye coordination better, so that I can look up and, lock on the Falcons. And I still do it. I still try to practice, so to speak, so that when they come flying by, I'm better able to find them and get a good photo.
Yeah. And so question I kind of have for you is, you mentioned that you one of the things you've had to do is just learn their patterns and learn where they are. How much difference are you seeing just from individual to individual? Because we have had a few different males on the tower. We've had many different broods of chicks. How much different are the individuals that you have followed and encountered?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So for me, it started with Grinnell, and I will say some of the patterns change depending upon the time of year. So I've learned over the years, but Grinnell liked to be on top of the lantern a lot, where he would be. And he spent a lot of time up there. And for instance, in the afternoon, a lot of times the Falcons are on the east side of the campanile, and I typically sit west so I won't see them. Alden, as we all know, was an all balcony, all loaf player. So he could be found in a few places. And actually, one of the spots was on the south side of the camera, which we have called Alden's loaf spot, and discovered that. And he was there very frequently on the south side, which was pretty funny. And it was right between a column and a light post. Lou, of course, was the famous clock face dweller. Lou could be seen on any of the clock faces. And what was really kind of interesting about that, actually in the beginning, when he was courting Annie, he would come in, kind of fly by and land up on Evans. And then eventually he was flying by with prey and landing up on Evans, which was kind of very interesting in the beginning. But Lou, when he was learning about the clocks, he didn't understand or couldn't move depthly when the hands moved. So eventually, as the hands moved, he would slide down. But as time wore on, he really got adept at just hopping up to a place where he didn't have to move. It was really kind of interesting to watch that adaptation as time went on. So.
That's pretty funny. And I can attest to, there are some very particular spots each bird likes. We know exactly where Annie likes to sit when she's on the nest level. And we have like preset locations on our cameras that we can just click a button and go right to Annie's light, where we know that Annie loves to sit. So there are a lot of habits that these birds get into. And each brood is different. I think every year probably that you've been looking at the broods, Bridget, they've gone to different places and been on different buildings and spent time in different ways.
No, that's actually really interesting. So when I first started coming on campus, I had no idea that I didn't know about the webcams. I didn't know anything about Cal Falcons. And that first year, I figured out I probably arrived about a week and a half after Fledge. And there was another woman, Bonnie, and we were just on campus the other day during Fledge Watch. And we were talking about how the first year with Sequoia, Poppy, and Redwood, what really helped us, they were really loud. So we could hear them up in the background coming in. And that was super helpful for us to understand. Yeah. And since then, not very loud, except for this year. I think it's going to be a loud year. Minimally with Eclipse and Knox seem to be pretty loud so far this year, and they have slightly different variations in their calls. But yeah, each year, I mean, last year, the chicks were on some of the lower buildings, which was very unusual, but offered a lot of folks a much closer view, which was really nice, including us. So it was really fun to see them on the Bancroft Library and Wheeler and some of the lower places. And this year, Evans seems to be the spot right now. So, yeah.
All right. And you briefly mentioned, people you're talking with at Fledge Watch. Would you like to tell us more about what is the Fledge Watch? Because, there's a group of people watching Fledge, but there is an official Fledge Watch. Would you care to tell us about what that is, what people are doing, and what people are watching for?
Absolutely. There's about 20 Fledge Watch monitors, official monitors on campus, led by Mary, Malik, and Jan. And we are on campus. Our job is to keep track of the chicks as they fledge. We are there in case something happens. Occasionally a chick gets grounded. As we're sitting there, a lot of us are just focused right on the campanile in various places, watching the movements. When one of the chick flies or fledges, we watch visually to see where they go. And also people will move if necessary if they go out of sight. For instance, yesterday, as it's happened the past couple of days, as soon as I've left, there's been a whole bunch of activity. Like I missed 2 of the fledges yesterday, as it happens. And so even for me, I have my camera there, and it's fun to get a good shot, but I use it to track the chicks, and I will use it for IDing a lot of times. So we can say, that was Eclipse, and Eclipse looked like he was flying well. Okay, he looked like he landed well. Oh, there's Aurora. Maybe could use a little more altitude or what, things like that. Those are the kind of things that we're looking for to see how they're doing. And yesterday, for instance, we probably had people in 4 different locations. When I got back after everyone had decided to fly, Saul was in a tree. So there was a couple folks sitting in various places to keep an eye on her. I believe Knox was on Evans, so people had eyes there. And a couple of the chicks were back on the campanile. And yeah, we communicate with one another. If we're going to move, if somebody moves, we actually go and follow them. Saul flew north yesterday to a place where we couldn't see her, and 3 or 4 people split up and went in various directions to try to locate her, and we were able to locate her. And we do have a WhatsApp group that we're using to communicate with ourselves as we go along. We've also used the campanile a lot this year, both because sometimes the chicks land deep into a building and there are areas that they can get stuck. So at different times we've gone up to be able to look down. And this year, interestingly, the chicks are landing on a carillon level, which is where the bells are, and people can go up to that level and have a 360 view. Tourists and everyone go up to get the view, and we've had folks there if one of the chicks is on the carillon level, so they're not disturbed. So.
Yeah, it's really been I think a bit of a different year because there's been the 4 chicks. This is the first year we've had such a big brood, and from driving the camera on the tower, it's been incredibly difficult to keep up with all 4, especially when they're kind of running around a bunch. So, Fledge Watch has been, I think, a bit of a different beast for the people working this year and trying to catch up to all the chicks.
Yeah, no, it's been very hot here. For people not familiar with the Bay Area, it's been 85 degrees and about 50% humidity, which is very unusual. And campus is hilly in places, and we've been running all over the places and having to hydrate. Yeah, so it's been challenging this year for sure.
And let's make sure that people are asking questions in chat. Make sure if you have questions, make sure to drop them in chat, and we'll answer them as best we can. Either about fledges, peregrines, photography, pretty much all topics are ripe for us.
Yeah, and I was going to go to kind of a pretty relevant question, in terms of stuff like the Fledge Watch, but overall. So how much territory are Falcons in general, are Falcons, covering in a city? And Bridget, how much traveling do you have to do to keep track of the Falcons at any given time?
Well, I mean,
and
yeah.
I can.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to kind of answer the more broad version of this, because Falcon territories historically have been quite large, spans of miles. And I do know that the Falcons, the Campanile Falcons, have been spotted as far as in the Bay, and Alden, we knew, even hunted over the ocean, and also have been spotted up in the East Bay Hills. So they have a very large territory that they're covering, but they also have kind of a core area that they spend the majority of their time, that's near their nest, that's near kind of the middle area. So they have a pretty big area they cover. They have a much smaller territory that they really strongly defend. And then as it happens within cities specifically, where there's a lot of birds and a lot of possible nest sites, they're more and more willing to have other falcons nesting in close-ish proximity to one another.
So how far do you typically have to wander to find the falcons at Berkeley?
Yeah, well, primarily for the most part, we stay stationary until someone flies off and we can't see them as we're monitoring. Around campus, it's hard for me to kind of gauge distance. It's primarily the falcons, when they fledge and fly, are within the confines of the campus initially, and eventually they start to fly a little bit further. Eclipse is top of his class and is doing very well, and we've seen him fly to the north, pretty far to the north, possibly just off of campus, and to the west as well. So he's doing quite well.
Yeah, and that segues very well into kind of this question. How far away will the chicks typically go after leaving the area? And this is a good, interesting question, because it kind of depends on what time frame you're talking about. Peregrines are typically dependent on their parents, or they're assisted by their parents, and are on their parents' territory for 3 to 8 weeks after they fledge. They don't typically leave their parents' territories before then. After that point, they kind of get maybe gently encouraged to go off on their own, and they will go to start exploring. And this is one of the big kind of black boxes of science, that we don't know the exact answer to this very well. We have anecdotal evidence of how far they travel, but it requires a lot of luck to get those data points unless you invest the money in transmitters, which are kind of a different beast.
And there are some logistical issues because people are like, well, why don't you just put GPS transmitters on the young birds, before they leave the nest? And the answer is, although you can band them while they're still unflighted and can go up to the nest site and band them because their legs develop first, the rest of them needs a little time to catch up. So GPS transmitters that, a lot of projects use to track where falcons are going, you can't put those right on a young bird still in the nest when the banding happens because they're going to get bigger. So that's why, exactly where young birds start and then move to does become a bit of a black box, is just because there's logistical issues involved. And then, okay, there are other kinds of transmitters, but they'd have to be much lighter ones that wouldn't be able to be maintained nearly as long. So, we're thinking of some ways to look into this. There's some ideas, but, getting this kind of project off the ground takes quite some time occasionally.
Yeah, there's a lot of permitting involved and fundraising and all sorts of stuff. And then this kind of segues into another great question. When do the chicks typically permanently leave the nest and go establish their own territories? So after that kind of 8-week window, roughly, that's when they leave their parents' territories. And then they kind of go exploring. Some juvenile birds will establish a territory in their second full year of life, or second year of life. So the year after they hatch. But some wait longer. There are a number of chicks that are the birds that won't establish a territory until they're at least 2 years old. So it can take them some time, but sometimes they get lucky and find a spot right away.
All right. And then I have a question here for Bridget in specific. Where do you shoot from? The ground, buildings? Because one does really wonder, where are you to get such great shots?
I want to imagine that you sit in a lawn chair with a bunch of hot air balloons attached to it and kind of float up in the sky.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So it really depends upon the time of the year, for one, and the light, and also the view, because I want unobstructed views. So in the morning, I'll typically start sitting about southwest or south of the campanile, and I follow the sun depending upon what time of day I get there. A lot of times I am on the west side. I usually go after work, and the sun is set up pretty nicely, and it gives me a wide view, not only of the campanile, but the areas to the north and the south. And I also can turn around and look west. Annie and Archie are often, or I've gotten better over the years at spotting them soaring from very far away. And as I've said to a few people over the years, I can keep your eye on them because they will come in 2 seconds flat when they put on those Falcon jets and they, what I call stoop land onto the campanile. So that's one of the things. So the west side, and then this time of year, June, sometimes I will move up to the north because the sun has shifted again. I rarely go on the east side because the light isn't good and I don't have a good view, a good unobstructed view. So
I feel like it's a really, go ahead.
Yeah, no, the only thing, I'm just seeing these photos. So these photos were shot right here from the campanile. And that's something I had done it once last year with a smaller camera. And this time when we were trying to locate eclipse, some folks had gone up and I thought, well, let me just see with my big camera, am I going to be able to shoot through the barred windows? And it worked, quite well. So some of these are from on top. And I did it again yesterday to shooting across Evans. We were looking for Knox, who was famously way far in and difficult to see. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the campus is such a wonderful place to shoot because it is so open and downhill to the west. And so in the afternoon, you get that wonderful light kind of coming across the bay and right onto the campanile.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I have another biology question, which we've come across quite a bit. And we actually relatively recently have started to get direct evidence about the answer to this. So, once families separate, if they encounter each other again, do they know not to mate with each other? Because, naturally, the campanile, for example, and a lot of these other sites that chicks are hatched from would be a good territory if for some reason, they're found their way back. And it turns out there is evidence that they do recognize their family again later if they return, because there have now been documented instances of falcons that were hatched previous years returning to their natal territory where they're originally hatched, and not making an effort to take over that territory, but instead actually feeding their younger siblings hatched that year. So this indicates to me that they do, in fact, recognize who their family is. So, difficult to say exactly what they're perceiving, but there does appear to be recognition, and there wasn't an attempt to take over the territory. So, yeah, apparently they have some sense of who is their family.
And I think a really interesting part about that kind of question is that this is kind of the first time that we're able to start kind of assessing that in any sort of scientific way, because peregrine falcon populations were so low for so long that there weren't these major interactions between territories. There's just plenty of space for peregrines to go. And now we have a situation where the population has recovered very, very well, and density is getting higher, where we might start to see those interactions between family members. So we're still, I think, gathering a lot of data on it. But as Lynn said, we're starting to get evidence that they do recognize each other even after some time.
All right. And now photography question again. Exposure times, ISO, autofocus.
Yeah. So I shoot in manual mode. I generally use auto ISO. For speed, at minimum 2,500, sometimes maybe up to 5,000, and generally wide open for birds in flight. The birds are perched. I generally go down to 800. I do sometimes shoot fully manual. It just depends upon the lighting. What's tricky on the campus and why I use ISO is that it can go from light to dark pretty quickly with the buildings and whatnot. So auto ISO has helped with that. And yeah, some of the lighting situations can be pretty tricky.
All right, now kind of a Bay Area specific question, but why on earth are so many adolescent falcons ending up on Treasure Island? So for those not familiar as much with the Bay Area, there is an island kind of between the east part of the bay and San Francisco that is connected by the major thoroughfare of the Bay Bridge. What on earth is happening? Why are there so many falcons ending up there?
Well, I didn't know that there were a lot of falcons that ended up there. So if I had to guess, it's food related. That there's a lot of shorebirds and other animals out there for them to eat. We've noticed that the last 3 males, in particular Alden and Lou, did a lot of hunting down by the bay. They hunt a lot of shorebirds. Archie has done a little bit of that, although he's been, I think, more of a pigeon guy and dove guy than Alden and Lou were. So there's abundant resources there for them to look for food.
Yeah, and it's a pretty large open space to look for food, and yeah, and probably not really a super sufficient place for nesting because it doesn't have stuff like the tall buildings. And it's so very close to, a lot of other stuff that wouldn't be favorable, but probably a good place for a young bird to spend time hunting. Naturally, this is speculation. I cannot know what the birds are thinking, but yeah, that seems like, very probably.
And just to follow up on your point there, A lot of you know that peregrine falcons hunt birds. There are other bird hunting raptors out there. Sharp-shinned hawks, Cooper's hawks, they also are bird specialists, but they specialize in birds in forested areas. Whereas peregrine falcons, they specialize in birds in very open areas. So they really do kind of search for those wide open spots to hunt in.
So do peregrines ever predate seagulls?
Yes, they do. Peregrines they will eat pretty much anything with feathers. The smallest recorded prey is hummingbirds. I mean, there's also been like moths, but for birds, it's hummingbirds are smallest. The largest ever recorded have been Canada geese and sandhill crane, which is kind of crazy to think.
That's about as big as you can get.
We know that Larry, who lives out on Alcatraz, has been seen taking both gulls and geese. So she is a really big bird and has been taking some really big prey. And actually, just because I mentioned Larry, what was your experience shooting the family out on Alcatraz?
Yeah, great question. A very different experience. And so we went out to Alcatraz, and first we had to find them, and we had an idea of where they were. And as you're saying, I was amazed. I haven't been on Alcatraz in a number of years, but the number of birds out there and nesting birds, it was spectacular.
And I want to interject just as a general for people who, because now it is, there's a live cam of the birds on Alcatraz and where the falcons are nesting. You cannot approach the actual nest site. That is inaccessible, but also very much off limits. So that adds to the amount of patience and difficulty there was for a photographer wanting to photograph these. But I just want to, remind people, if, they are sort of interested, the nest site itself is not accessible and is not to be accessed.
Yeah, we had an idea of where it might be, and we were very far away from it. So yeah, good point. What was interesting about Alcatraz is there's no obstructed view, and it was very windy. There were lots of birds, and in the area that we thought might be the entrance, I would say Laurencia and her mate fiercely were going after seagulls, cormorants, everything. I mean, it was, I've been super impressed by Annie, who, by the way, this week has, I think yesterday or the day before, went after crows probably half a dozen plus times. She was not happy with the crows. Laurentium, it was an absolutely dazzling display watching them go, and a little bit difficult to determine, or seeing the juice fly amongst all the birds. It took us a little bit to kind of be like, oh, okay, oh yeah, that's a falcon. Watching the falcon zip by and understanding it. And I think the thing that helped me to get the photos was the fact that we did have a wide point of view. So if they all of a sudden were flying towards San Francisco, I had a shot at following them back as they zip back, to their nest site. But it was just amazing to see them. I've mostly seen urban falcons, and I do see them occasionally when I'm out in Northern California and whatnot. But it was amazing. Yeah, it was hard. It was hard to photograph them. It was fun. I'd do it again in an instant.
All right, and now here's kind of a good biology question and a good observation, especially because we're talking about kind of post, fledge behaviors of the young. But there's also Annie and Archie apparently were doing a little bit of, what's called scraping, where they're kind of moving rocks around in the box. Why are they doing that?
Yeah, this is a very good question. And I think the first time I saw that behavior, I was like, oh my gosh, is this going to be like record-breaking scientific stuff that we're getting like a second nest in a row. And no, apparently this is kind of one of the things that just happens. So peregrine falcons, they do one brood a year. If the eggs fail, they will attempt to do a second nest. But once the eggs hatch and the chicks fledge, they're done. The behavior we're seeing with the scraping and kind of nest prep stuff, a little bit of that is kind of hormone induced. So these birds go through really interesting changes in hormones throughout the year, where during the non-breeding season, their hormone levels drop significantly. And then during the breeding season, ramp up quite a bit. So some of those behaviors are triggered by hormone levels, and they still have quite a bit of breeding hormones in them right now. It's also a bit of a courtship behavior on behalf of kind of Archie and Annie kind of maintaining that pair bond. So that's why we're kind of continuing to see that behavior, even though we know that they're not going to produce another clutch of eggs.
Yeah, and occasionally, like outside of the breeding season, for example, you'll see copulation, you'll see, them mating, them doing head bow displays, and that is not related to, specifically trying to produce eggs. It is just part of a pair bonding behavior. And so post-nesting season, and especially once the chicks are gone, occasionally you'll see some of this pair bonding behavior because, assuming all goes well, they likely will both return to this site and mate again next year if there's no problem. But of course, each individual is still interested in, having some sense of the others and the others' commitment to the site and all of that. So it's a little bit just, they still have some of those nesting hormones and feelings in them. And some of it is part of a courtship thing that does continue a little bit throughout the year in populations like this that don't do any migration. All right. And now here's a good one about the fledge watch, because for the most part, and, this is especially true when people are, concerned that the chicks look hungry. Are you going to go up and do something? And, we have said that we do have a policy of non-interference. But during fledge watch, you were saying we were watching people. If a chick got stuck in a building, what do we do?
Yeah, there's kind of a balance here between letting the natural world take its course with kind of preventing human interference with the natural world from occurring, the natural path from occurring. So what we're most worried about in with kind of fledge watch is the chicks ending up in a situation where they're being overly impacted by humanity and kind of the changes that we make to the environment. So if a chick ends up in a place where it is not capable of getting out or is stuck or is at risk of being hurt, we would definitely rescue it. It is kind of within our purview to kind of to make sure that they are safe in a world that is maybe not quite what they evolved to live in. So that's kind of our general policy. We still, during the breeding season, have this non-interference policy where if there's something that happens to one of the chicks, we won't go up there and kind of interfere with what's going on.
It should also be, the chicks in the nest going up into the nest to interfere with what's going on also is a much more disruptive act than to, once the young are fledged, to get them out of the dangerous situation, like being on the road in a building. So it's a little bit of also, again, what people get concerned about are like, are they eating enough? Interfere. Well, what kind of intervention would we put forth? If the chicks are not getting enough food, that wouldn't be, ultimately detrimental or not helpful. We're unable to pop by Berkeley Bowl, pick up a quail, and drop it off on the Carillon level. But then here's the counterpoint question. What about if we saw a golden eagle pursuing from a distance?
I think, in that case, the general policy would be to let kind of nature take its course. We are kind of just a small part of this big world out there, and we can't kind of control everything that happens. Golden eagles, they need to eat too. All of these animals are interacting with other individuals, both as predator or prey, on many different levels. So it's kind of we're privileged to have this beautiful glimpse of the natural world, and I think for the most part, it's not our job to really alter it.
All right. So I saw this question a couple times, so I won't miss it. And this is one where I don't specifically know the answer, but I can give kind of a broad thing. Okay, they're birds reaching speeds of 200 plus miles an hour. What kind of success rate are they having when they're trying to catch something like a pigeon?
I don't know the exact number. So predatory, I don't think there's any predatory species out there that has like a greater than 50% success rate in hunts. It just doesn't happen. The predators are, by and large, they fail a lot more than they succeed. So, when Annie goes out to hunt a pigeon, she might pursue a pigeon 10 times and only catch one. I think the person to ask about the success rate would be a falconer, because they would have that information. I honestly don't. But what we kind of run into with people kind of wondering about, like, are they getting enough food, or what's the food situation? If you look at Annie's behavior or Archie's behavior, they spend a lot of time just kind of chilling out and hanging out. So they don't appear to be worried, like, oh, where's my next meal going to be? They have a lot of confidence in being able to catch enough food for both them and their chicks in I think a relatively quick amount of time. I know, Bridget, you've seen some kind of the beginnings and maybe ends of some hunts where the birds leave and then come back pretty quickly with prey.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's always interesting, because sometimes, and more recently, I would say, Annie goes out and comes back more quickly with prey versus going out for, an hour and a half or whatnot. And sometimes it's also, as it's difficult to tell, right? I try to follow the trajectory of what I think I'm seeing in terms of them bringing in prey, but it could be that something was stashed on a building, was already defeathered, and they're just bringing it by, like it wasn't caught when they went out that particular time. And other times, I think I have a better idea of when they went out, and especially if a bird is not defeathered, that, oh, okay, just got that one. So.
Yeah. And I will say, what's the success rate? Just if you do spend time watching falcons hunting, a lot of the times, what do you even call an attempt? The falcons do spend a lot of time waiting until they see a favorable situation, a possible prey item in an open enough location to try to catch. And occasionally you'll see them sort of going up, starting a pursuit, and then seeing that the angles are all wrong and just giving up on it relatively quick. So do we call that, a hunting attempt or not? So that also makes it difficult to quantify, what percent success rate they have.
Yeah, and sometimes it seems like they're just trying to see if they can get an easy meal, and then they don't try very hard if it turns out that they can't. They're kind of maybe hoping that the pigeon does something dumb, and if it doesn't, they just stop.
Yeah. All right. Now here's kind of an important set of questions, concerns about pesticides, avian flu. I will also add mercury and rodenticides. Have there been recent incidences with falcons with this kind of stuff?
Yeah. So, just a background is what drove peregrine falcons to the very, very edge of extinction was a environmental toxin called DDT that we were using as a pesticide. So birds are extremely vulnerable to these broad-scale environmental toxins and other diseases. And so lately there's been concern about some toxins that we are putting into the environment, such as mercury, rodenticides. And we're actually doing some studies with participating in the studies of the UC Santa Cruz Predatory Bird Research Group. Shout out Dr. Zika Glucks, that are looking at how much mercury is in the feathers of these birds, and we can figure out how much of that toxin is leaching into their food chain and food supply. Avian flu is a bit of a different beast because that's just a normal biological pathogen. It's a really horrible disease for birds. It doesn't act as a respiratory disease like we kind of experience as humans, but instead is a neurological disease and is very, very fatal. There's some really encouraging news on that front in that there was a recent study where they drew blood from birds coming into rehab facilities that were not going in for avian flu related reasons, but like something like a broken wing or some other thing that was causing the bird to go to the rehab facility. And they were starting to find a high incidence of antibodies, of avian influenza antibodies in these birds, suggesting that there's been a lot of birds that have been exposed and gotten better, which is wonderful for this kind of really major outbreak we've had over the last few years, is that maybe we're potentially getting towards the tail end of it. That said, there were still cases reported very recently in the Bay Area in chicken flocks. So it's still a threat out there, and I think something that we've still got to kind of keep an eye on.
Yeah, and sort of tangentially to that, occasionally people question like, oh, but what is really the point to stuff like these rehab facilities? Like, does it really matter one bird or not? And, even if you are not the sort of person who cares about one individual bird or not, a lot of important data about, just things relating to the health of populations. For example, this avian flu situation, having these wildlife rehab facilities where people with veterinary expertise are, able to see what's happening in the populations of wild animals has proven to be, useful in an even broader sense. So just as when people are like, well, does the one bird really matter? Well, even if you are a jaded person that doesn't think one bird really matters, there's a lot that is coming out of that sort of project. So
I got a question for you, Bridget. Have you ever captured Annie or Archie or potentially even Lou or Alden in a hunting stoop?
I have. Yeah. Actually, in the photos, there's a couple of photos of Annie where she's kind of corkscrewing too, what she was doing with the crows. But yeah, definitely have caught them in a stoop, actually photographed them. Annie, I've noticed her, she does a couple of different approaches. Sometimes it's straight off the Campanile, heading towards the Hearst Mining Circle or towards the Memorial Glade. I've also seen her do what I will call not necessarily flying out with intent and, just kind of just flapping and going out and then very suddenly go into a stoop. And yeah, and the photos here, not showing right now, but were of Annie doing just that. And she was eventually went into a stoop down to the crows. Yeah. So, and
I can go back to that one.
Yeah, she doesn't always, and I was going to say she doesn't always stoop for food. Sometimes it's just to clear an area, clear the airspace. Yeah.
Oh, so. There's too many good photos. I can't find it.
Yeah. So an aside, what might be a good idea to have for a social media post is just, we're talking a lot about specific locations on the UC Berkeley campus, specific buildings. Perhaps we should put together a little map of the campus and just kind of provide, some points that gives a sense as to where, in this space these birds are spending time. So
yeah, that's a good idea.
Should we do that?
Yeah, we should make a map, a Falcon map, the Falcon map of UC Berkeley.
Yeah, because I know a lot of people are logging in from distant places as well as a lot of locals. So yeah, that might be useful.
So a kind of quick follow-up to that stooping question for my own curiosity, how much time do you have to like get your camera up and get on Annie or Archie when they're doing that like really crazy stoop? Like how do you catch that image?
A lot of times it's because I'm following them initially with my camera before they stoop, or occasionally I'll get it when, especially if they're going towards the mining circle, there's just enough time for me to get my camera up. But I think one of the things for me, and I say this when people come and visit on campus, a lot of times I'm very focused. And I often say to people, my eyes are on the skies. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I'm very focused and kind of laser to watch. And even with my camera, we were talking about this the other day, I've gotten to the point where my right eye's over the viewfinder and I'm using my left eye peripherally as I'm shooting to see any additional motion. And that's something I've kind of adapted to over the years. So those are a couple of ways. And again, a lot of it was just practicing, seeing something, I would test myself, I'd say, okay, there's the top of a tree that's 200 yards away. And let me see how quickly I can lift my camera and focus on that top of the tree. And that's really, I think what's, like I said before, what helped me the most to be able to even begin to get those shots. So. Oh, the other thing I was going to say, if you want to see, this is a great time. It is the best time, in my humblest of estimations, to be on campus. The juveniles are relatively close by with the parents, especially in the coming days, probably over the weekend, when they'll be flying a little bit more. Eventually, they start going off with Annie and Archie to watch them hunt or to learn how to hunt or transfer prey and whatnot. So I think this weekend would be some really great viewing. So.
Yeah. And it's really a wonderful time to go visit. And really one of the cool behaviors that we're about to start seeing are actually prey transfers in midair from the parent to the kid. So, the offspring, the chicks will be following their parents in the air and then taking food from them that they're bringing in midair, which is a real amazing sight to see.
Yeah, and in the next kind of few days and, a little past, this is the opportunity you get to see some of the really interesting interactions they have between siblings, because unlike many bird species, they do continue to interact with their siblings, after they've started flying, and they have kind of interesting and playful interactions between them. So that's one of the really neat things to see. So official invitation, everybody who wants to see some interesting falcon behavior, now's a good time to drop by campus. And here, I have a basic falcon biology question. Do they ever nest in trees?
I don't think any falcon has ever been recorded. Wait, is there one?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Never mind. Well,
there is a webcam in Poland with a pair that has a nest at the top of a very tall tree. And that is a super outlier. They very much prefer cliff faces and ledges and very high spaces. But apparently there is one out there
who's
who's
just broken off at the top or something.
Yeah, a little bit. And there's like a platform somebody put there probably for something more like an osprey, which are platform nesters in trees, and they found it. But I just kind of wanted to say this and this comes up for me a lot because, I am a biologist. I do study birds, and people ask a lot of questions, and I'll often be like, all right, and this is what they typically do, except when they don't. There will often be that like one exception that's doing a different thing. So yes, there's one situation I've heard of. It almost never happens, but I guess categorically, you can't say it never, ever happens, pretty much.
All right. So this is a question for the future of campus. As many of you know, and probably many of you don't, Evans Hall is coming down. And Evans Hall has been one of all of the Falcons' favorite stopping points. A lot of Bridget's photography, if you go and look at her work on Instagram, a lot of it features Evans Hall. So what do we think the impact will be on future fledglings? Do you want to speculate?
Oh man, and this is strictly speculation. I mean, they end up on Evans because there's a clear line of sight from Evans, and it's relatively tall. But there's plenty of other buildings that are relatively tall with a pretty clear line of sight. So probably they will end up with a different location that sort of is the one that appears most favorable to a chick. I don't think the loss of the building is going to, drastically change their behavior. It just means a different building will be the favorable one. I don't know which, but I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, Bridget, any speculation based on what you've seen them do about what their second favorite might be?
Such a great question, because I think Evans, in my humblest of estimations, is ideal because of its height, its proximity. It's relatively close. It's a little bit higher than some of the other buildings around. Yeah, it's a really good question. I wonder, even though they're significantly lower, perhaps the library and Wheeler, which are directly west of the Campanile, maybe Stanley Hall, maybe some of those buildings up near the mining circle might be a possibility.
Yeah, and we last year the chicks fledged towards the west, went towards the library. So there is precedence for them going other directions for their first flights rather than to Evans. So I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
All right, bird biology. How long till the chicks start to get the yellow feet and beaks that you see on adults? And you will notice on the cameras now even that, one of the chicks has much yellower feet than the others. And they will start developing the much more typical yellow foot coloration about the same time that they start to develop
the full adult plumage.
But those big pigmentations are, partially mediated by some of their diet. So just as they get older, it will be progressively darker. Some individuals will end up just naturally having, brighter yellow or, less of a dramatic yellow. Males often have the much more dramatic yellow legs. So it will slowly progress through time. Even like in the period now, you'll see them starting to get yellower. But they kind of, after that first year, will end up sort of with it as yellow as it's probably going to get for that individual.
So I think we've got time for about probably one or two more questions. So I wanted to toss this one to Bridget because I really like this one. After taking photographs of these birds for so long, do you have a sense for their individual personalities?
Oh, good question. Oh boy, it's a hard thing, right? Because like part of me, I want to be the observer, just the straight observer, and certainly not try to anthropomorphize and say, oh, this one. But even as we're watching in the past few days, I think I get a sense, Eclipse is very talkative and is zipping all over campus and has already followed Annie and Archie. So I think he's going to be a fast learner. Aurora's been hanging out for the past couple of days, but it's also been super, super hot, which I imagine maybe has some impact. So I think, yes, there is a sense of their individual personalities. And I think that's what makes it even, it's so much fun to watch them, and even just to watch them develop after they fledge to when they go off. And then it's really sad too when they leave. You kind of get used to, oh, this one did this one today. Eclipse actually just this morning has bopped Annie and Archie off the lantern a couple of times, or off where they've been perching. So that's been pretty funny to watch, right? So yeah, there are certain things that we observe, I think, in general. Yeah.
Yeah, we've seen Eclipse chase both Annie and Archie off the nest level of the tower in the last couple days too. He's been chasing his parents quite a bit.
Yeah.
He's a little bit of a character.
Yeah, and I do kind of this question also makes a point, and you kind of said that initially you wanted to be a dispassionate observer, not anthropomorphize the birds, and that is true. They're not people. We can't attribute, strictly speaking, human thoughts to them. But at the same time, it is sort of a fallacy to think that, well, they are an animal and they all do the same thing and they have no, unique personality. Each individual does do different things. They do have unique characteristics. So you can't, think that they are like people necessarily, but you also can't think that they are a robot and they're all the same and they follow just a certain instinct that is the absolute perfect, instinctual adaptation. Neither of those things is true. So, to keep that in mind. And I feel like this is a good place to kind of start wrapping up with, do you have a memorable story about photographing the Falcons that you'd like to share?
Memorable story. Oh my gosh. I mean, there's so many. I'll say in general for me, the description I like to use is that even after 5 years, I like to say that I am a kid who ate 10 candy bars excited when I'm out there. It's super thrilling to watch them every year. I think the memorable story for me is probably going up for banding last year. That was an incredible, I don't even know what to say. I felt like I was honored to be in Annie's house, right? Even though Annie wasn't too happy to have me there or anybody. But yeah, I think that to actually see and to observe Annie, flying like right at us and whatnot, was really incredible. And just to watch that whole process. I think probably the first, we were just talking about this, Bonnie and I, the other night, was watching Grinnell in 2020. There were 2 ravens that were kind of sauntering up towards the Campanile, and Grinnell and one of the Jews chased it. Grinnell actually hit the raven and it spun. And these were first experiences for us, and we were looking at it going, wow, we didn't know they did that, So, and there's been a lot of, wow, I didn't know they did that type of moments, and it still keeps happening. It's also one of the things that keeps me out there. I never get tired of it. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank all of you for kind of supporting all of us and what we do. I can't get over how much kind of people are enjoying the Falcons and kind of love experiencing them. And so it's really wonderful to kind of share that all with you guys. So yeah, we're going to sign off, but,
we have gotten a ton of great questions, and, we, always end up missing questions because there's a limited time, but, our social media channels and our comment sections, we'll answer questions that are posed to us there, via text, but, but we'll answer questions, we'll answer more questions. We're here and happy to do that. So,
all right. Well, get out there and go enjoy the kids flying, because it's a blast.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.